Hi, I'm Bill Whalen. I'm the Virginia Hobbs Carpenter Distinguished Policy Fellow in Journalism here at the Hoover Institution. And I'd like to welcome you back to the Hoover Book Club, where we bring Hoover Fellows and friends together to discuss their latest writings. This is, by the way, our second book club interview. If you missed the first, you can check it out online at our website, www.hoover.org. I think it's also on YouTube. It was a talk with the one and only Victor Davis Hanson about his latest book, The Dying Citizen, How Progressive Elites, Tribalism, and Globalization Are Destroying the Idea of America. You definitely want to check that out if you're a VDH fan. Now, the great thing I find about life here at the Hoover Institution is that in a time when supply chains are decidedly broken, I never run out of brilliant minds with whom to connect, fellows who can reflect on their intriguing intellectual pursuits and explain them in ways that, frankly, a layman like me can easily understand. Today being no exception, our guest being Herb Lin. Herb is the Hoover Institution's Hank J. Holland Fellow in Cyber Policy and Security. He's also a senior research scholar for cyber policy and security at the Center for International Security and Cooperation, like the Hoover Institution. It's located on the campus of Stanford University. Herb, thanks for stopping by today.
Thanks for having me.
So a lot to know about Herb Lin, cybersecurity maven, swing dancer, struggling magician. It sounds like you do it all, my friend. I'm reminded of the old joke about Fred Astaire, Herb. Maybe you know the story. He does a screen test for Hollywood. The Hollywood guy doing the test comes back and reports, quote, can't act, can't sing, can dance a little. So I'm not sure you're Fred Astaire, but I know you could dance a little bit. No, thanks for coming on. And yeah, congratulations on the book, Herb. It was a great read. And I will say it's the kind of book that students love because, to be honest with you, it's easy to get through. And I don't mean that as an insult to you. This is a very complicated topic. It'd be very easy to write a couple thousand pages and just absolutely lose people, but you did a very nice job. 7 chapters, I think, Herb, 146 pages, and really did a nice job explaining things. Explain the genesis of writing this. Was this just natural extension of work you're doing, or did you have a light bulb moment where you decided to do the book? How did you come about writing this?
The real story on it is that I was actually scheduled to write a book on a completely different topic, and I procrastinated at least part by writing a book, by writing this book. But this book seriously came about because I was asked to give a talk at an institution where on the subject of the impact of cyber technology on nuclear deterrence. And this was a place that was intended to train upcoming new scholars to understand nuclear weapons and the like. And so I knew the organizer there, and he knew me, and he said, "Why don't you come to give this talk?" And I gave the talk, and as I usually do, I record the talks that I give. And it turned afterwards, I realized that nobody had ever put all this stuff together before in one place. Mostly people, when they talk about cyber and nuclear stuff, they talk about threats to command and control. And that's certainly a big deal. And that's certainly a big part of my book, but it's not the only threat. And there are a lot of other aspects to it. So what I wanted to do was to cover the whole business systematically. And that's what I did, and that's the genesis of this book.
So the notion of outdated technology with regard to missiles and silos surprises me, Herb. Not that outdated technology is a shocker. If you live in California, for example, we have an entity called the Economic Development Department. Herb, it's in charge of the state of California handing out unemployment checks. It runs on COBOL programming language. This is the equivalent of you and I having this conversation, not over modern laptops, but, Tandy Trash 80s back in the day. But you're suggesting in your book that our missile systems are very much the same, that we're running, on yesterday's technology. And I'm just shocked, Herb, with all the bright minds in government and obviously the rather important nature of nuclear weapons. How is this so?
Well, one of the so you're absolutely correct that it is true that that the command and control system and so on was last designed and upgraded in about 1985, late 80s or so. And we're still running the legacy of that. That doesn't mean individual components haven't been modernized, but it's basically the same architecture that we had back then. And so the interesting question is, why is that the case, and is this a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer is I can. It's both good and bad for reasons which I'll describe in a minute. Why is this the case? So it's been very, very hard to get consensus from the military and others on the need to upgrade the cyber portions, the command and control stuff. It's been very difficult to do that because the things that are sexier, the missile platform, the missiles and the submarines and the bombers and so on, tend to get the attention of policymakers much better, much more easily. Now, is it a good thing or a bad thing that we're running outdated technology? Well, it's a good thing, and in the sense that the threats that are out, the cyber threats that are out there right now are mostly geared towards modern technology. And so they're not particularly geared to really old stuff. There's no upside in being able to destroy that stuff. And so the fact that we're running an old architecture not connected to the internet and so on, that all is a plus for security. It's a minus for for operations and so on, for the reasons that you were suggesting, that it doesn't necessarily do all the things that you want to do, and getting replacement parts is really complicated. And your comment about COBOL, I don't think there's any COBOL running in the system, but I know there's some COBOL running in some places in the Defense Department, and it's very hard to find anybody who remembers anything about COBOL. And so the people who can do this are slowly dying out.
My point being that it all sounds just terribly primitive, Herb. I went to journalism school back in the early 1980s. I remember we've got computers in front of us. You look at that computer versus today, and it's laughable in terms of just how out of date it is. But are you saying it's just as simple that this is not a priority? I mean, I think of missiles and I think of missile defense primarily. And when I think of cyber, I think of, you and I did a podcast, for example, this spring, and we talked about the Colonial Pipeline, or maybe you talk about cyber in terms of security, in terms of meddling in elections. Or maybe you want to go back to when North Korea went after Sony Pictures over the movie they didn't care for. It just seems that we're not really looking at nuclear weapons right now, but perhaps your book is a wake-up call for that.
Well, I hope so. The cyber, the information technology aspects, the computerization of nuclear operations and nuclear weapons and so on, which is of course increasing, just like computerization in any other aspect of life, carries with it benefits and risks. And I think probably the biggest message in my book is that you want to calibrate that. You want to decide whether or not the benefits that you get are worth the additional risks that you take. And I see too few people actually doing that.
Right. So Herb, government is on the job in this regard. On March the 3rd, the Biden administration did release what it calls the Interim National Security Guidance. Herb, this is a good time for you to get a drink of water, because I'm about to read you something. It's going to take a minute to get through, but here it goes. Here's what they said, quote, "We will make cybersecurity a top priority, strengthening our capability, readiness, and resilience in cyberspace. We will elevate cybersecurity as an imperative across the government. We will together to manage and share risk, and we will encourage collaboration between the private sector and the government at all levels in order to build a safe and secure online environment for all Americans." And wait, there's more, Herb. Quote, "We will expand our investments in the infrastructure and people we need to effectively defend the nation against malicious cyber activity. We will renew our commitment to international engagement on cyber issues, working alongside our allies and partners to uphold existing and shape new global norms in cyberspace. And we will hold actors accountable for destructive, disruptive, or otherwise destabilizing malicious cyber activity and respond swiftly and proportionally to cyber attacks by imposing substantial costs through cyber and non-cyber means." Woo. Okay, that's a very long-winded generality. So having heard all of that, what really specifically should the Biden administration be looking at right now?
Well, everything that you've just described is aspirational. It's an aspirational document. This is what we hope to be able to do. Part of my book addresses exactly the disconnect between the people at the top, the people who write the strategy, and the people at the bottom who actually have to implement them. So if you think about cybersecurity, it has a very, that's the security of your computer system. It has a very interesting function. It's supposed to make it impossible for a bad guy to use your system, right?
Right.
That's and it's supposed to be completely transparent when it's a good guy using the system.
Right.
So the job of cybersecurity is to be able to differentiate perfectly between good guys and bad guys, and prevent the bad guy from doing bad things, from doing anything on the system, and allow the good guy to do everything that the good guy wants to do. That's the whole point of security. Now, the fundamental problem in this is that you can't do it. You can't perfectly distinguish between good guys and bad guys.
Right.
And so this is always going to be an issue, and you're going to be making mistakes. Every time you make it easier for the good guy to do something, you're also making it sort of easier for some bad guys to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's only the second point is that when you're given a choice, when people are given a choice between something that's convenient versus something that's secure, they inevitably choose the convenient stuff. Okay. So how many times have you gone into a building and walked up a stairway and there's a door that says, do not prop open this door, and it's propped open with a brick, right? You've seen this 100 times. We've all seen this, okay? And it's not because people want to disregard security in particular. It's that it happens to be a convenient way to get to the bathroom from a conference or something like that. That's why they prop it open with a brick. And it's too much trouble to go through all the proper security procedures. You know, maybe you have to go all the way down the hall and come back around, and you know, and so on. And you really got to go to the bathroom. You want to just go cut through there.
Right.
Okay. So the point is that people always opt for convenience over security. Security is supposed to make stuff really inconvenient. Okay, that's its job for the bad guys. And you know, unfortunately, you know, since the system doesn't know, it makes it inconvenient for the good guys. That means people bypass it. Okay, so you have at the top all of this business about, yes, you want to make cybersecurity a top priority. Then as it filters down, but there are other things you want people to do. It's not just, I know how to make a computer that's perfectly secure, put a metal box around it, right? Don't let anything in, don't let anything out, perfectly secure. Not very useful, but perfectly secure, okay? But you want your computers to be able to do something. And so in this context, the problem is that they say cybersecurity is a top priority, absolutely, but there are other top priorities too. And it's that tension between doing stuff and being secure that always gets in the way of this. And people are motivated, they want to do their jobs, they will tend to forget about security. And that's the tension that this is, that the statement makes.
Okay, you reference bad actors here, Herb, and it seems to me that a handful of nations tend to come up in this conversation. Russia comes up in this conversation. China, North Korea, Iran, and there are probably a few others that you could name. I'm very interested in China in this regard. We have a lot of fellows at Hoover who study China. We have some who are in the camp that China needs to be negotiated with, some who are in the camp that a Cold War is underway. I don't know which camp you're in or not, but let's assume that we see China as essentially this century's equivalent of what the Soviets were in the second half of the 20th century, that we're on a collision course with them in terms of just, global influence. Explain to us our approach to cybersecurity versus how the Chinese government has their cybersecurity set up. Because I think you've talked about this in the past, just how the two countries have different approaches to this.
Well, so one thing is that the line between the private sector and the government in the United States is pretty sharp compared to where it is in China. Right. So in China, they have the ability to impose cybersecurity measures on a much broader scale in their quote private sector, whatever that means. Right. And we do. Okay. Now that has benefits and costs. I'm not saying that we should be like China, but certainly the ability to promulgate certain cybersecurity regulations, changes, and so on, is helps their cybersecurity posture. Right. And we don't have that ability. Mm-hmm. So Chinese companies are required by law to cooperate with the party. Right. There's no such law in the United States. I mean, you have to go through, if the US wants to influence the behavior of a private sector company, it'll go to, and the private company says no, the US can, try to force it, and then the private company will go to court. Right. And we have an independent judiciary. And sometimes that judiciary rules against the government and says, the government, go away. Right. But that doesn't happen in China.
So let's talk about the American approach then. Dwight Eisenhower, leaving office in 1960, Herb famously warns the country about, what do you call it, a military-industrial complex. And what he was getting at was that an overlap between government and the Pentagon, if you will, but there is a business around the military, and that involves both industry, who do contracting work, and also universities that do research. So how does cyber parallel that, Herb, or how does it differ in terms of, you have a cybersecurity issue and you have companies in Silicon Valley devoted to technology, universities like Stanford that study? How does the government blend all of that?
How does the government
blend that? And how should the government be balancing this in terms of reaching out to private sector, but also working with academia to, to make us a safer, more secure country?
Well, I mean, that is the global question of cybersecurity governance in the United States. How the public sector and private sector can work together to improve our cybersecurity. Nobody has a good answer to that. Let me give you an example of where we don't know how to proceed here.
Right.
Let's pretend for a minute that every company invests the correct amount in cybersecurity that's adequate for its business needs. Let's pretend that that's true. That's not true. They underinvest, but let's pretend it's true for a minute.
Right.
Now what you have is a bunch of companies that are all investing for cybersecurity up to the level that is adequate for their business needs. So all these businesses are taken care of. Okay. However, there are certain businesses among them that are not critical, whose functioning is not just critical to the stockholders, but critical to the nation, to the entire nation. Okay. So, for example, an example would be electricity. Okay. Right. Electric power generation is critical to the whole nation. It's not just critical to the stockholders of such and such a utility company. All right. So then you say, if you believe that, because it has this national impact, the cybersecurity posture of these companies has to be higher because they're critical to the nation, not just critical to someone. Now you have to invest even more money. Question, where does that money come from? And there's no good answer to that.
Right.
By definition, the company has been spending enough money for its own business, so the stockholders are happy. Okay. Right. But if they spend any more, they're getting extra security that the stockholders don't need. So stockholders are going to be mad. Okay. Does the government come in now and say, you have to do the extra, you have to be come in and order them to do it? Well, that's very controversial because now the government is reducing your profits. Okay. Right. Does the government come in and give you additional money to do it? Well, you could say that, but they don't know how much to be giving you because you know your own cybersecurity problems better, and you have now, if you're going to ask the government for money, you have every incentive to inflate that. Okay, and so there's this question of who pays for the additional security that the whole country needs, right? And nobody knows the answer to that because it's a political question, right? China doesn't have this problem, right? So.
Okay, so yeah, I noticed you used the words that the nation needs. So here's what I'm curious about, Herb. We can criticize the government till the sun goes down. We can talk about wasteful spending till the sun goes down. On the flip side, though, when the government is willing to expend treasure and also have a readily identifiable target, positive things can happen. I'm thinking Operation Warp Speed and coming up with vaccines against COVID. I'm thinking the Manhattan Project and building the atomic bomb. This is an example of taking just a large amount of government money, but also directing it at a goal. So the question would be, if we thought about this in cyber terms, Herb, we could come up with the money. As we see in Washington right now, we're debating trillions of dollars. So I don't think that, money available is quite the issue. I think the question is, what is the target? What is the goal? If you had to identify what the challenge is on cybersecurity, what exactly is it?
I think you have actually you have put your finger on exactly the key problem. That's exactly the right question to ask. A vaccine or an atomic bomb, you know when you've gotten it. Right. You don't know when you've gotten ahead of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is much more a game of, it's more like baseball, if you would think. There, you get better cybersecurity by increasing batting averages.
Right.
Okay. It's a never-ending battle. A hitter with a 300 batting average is obviously better than with a 200 batting average. We all accept that. Okay. But the guy with a 300 batting average is not guaranteed to get on base every time.
Right.
And the pitcher has to be more careful with him and so on. But he goes through the same kind of intellectual exercise that he does when he's hitting, going up against a 200 batter, right? Because a 200 batter can also nail him as well. And so you can be better at doing cybersecurity, but you'll never win it decisively. You'll never get to a point where there's no battle at all. And that's what people want. And when I have to worry, when I get to the point where I don't have to worry, but you'll never get to that point.
Right.
Because that's not the nature of the problem. Why is that? Why is that true? Because there's always a bad guy who has some incentive to want to compromise. Always. There's always that guy. And until you can, sort of eliminate all of those people, which you can, there's always going to be a problem.
Okay, so rather than doing this book club, what if I were able to give you 30 good minutes with the President of the United States? You could sit down in the Oval Office with him, say, Mr. President, here's what needs to be done. Go. But this will have to be an elevator pitch because we don't have 30 minutes here. But just what would you tell Joe Biden if you had a chance to talk cybersecurity with him? What does he need to know?
What I tell the president about this in the broad sense, find a way to couple your high-level pronouncements with align the incentives with the people you have control over on the ground. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of people working in cybersecurity on the ground. How do you get those people to be working towards the goal that you described in this very aspirational policy document that you just read to me?
Right.
That's probably the most important thing that you can do to make their incentives align, because that way that people will actually do things. They'll do the right thing. The problem right now is that people are disincentivized from doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. So that's the essence of the speech that I would give.
Would you tell him, I keep dating myself, I mentioned Eisenhower, and I'm going to go back to Kennedy, who famously ran in 1960 on the idea of a missile gap that maybe didn't exist at the time, but he had the American people believe that the Russians were, eating our lunch when it came to missile technology. Would you tell him there's a technology gap where it comes to cyber? In other words, are other nations ahead of us on this?
Well, their offense is better than our defense. That's certainly true. Then again, okay, our offense is better than their defense. Mm-hmm. So that's also true. And that's not something that we very much talk about. Nevertheless, right, the idea that of getting more and more getting better and better at cybersecurity is that's a worthy goal, but you'll never get to it. Right. Now, why? So this is and what I'm about to say here is actually an important part of my book as well. Mm-hmm. Operationally, it turns out that we have an unlimited appetite for computers that do more and more stuff for us. Right. Our computer now is better than our computer was 10 years ago. It does more. It's easier to use. It's faster. It has more functions. It does a whole lot more. Right. But also, it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complex than it was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Software is more complicated. Hardware is more complicated. The problem here is that as you make something more complicated, more complex, you make it less secure. Every computer security person will tell you that the enemy of security is complexity. More complex things have more ways to screw up on you.
Right.
Right. So more things to go wrong, more places for the attacker to get in. And the technical term is a larger attack surface, more vulnerabilities. Okay. So given that we always demand more functionality, we're always wanting more, we are implicitly asking for systems that give us that functionality, but are also more insecure. And the problem is people do not weigh the benefits of more functionality against the downside risk and cost of less security. Let me give you an example of this. I'm right now shopping for a new refrigerator. I don't want one with Wi-Fi connectivity. I don't need it. But you know something? It's really hard to get a refrigerator without Wi-Fi. Now,
Right.
I can do that if I want a low-end machine and so on. But, you know, but in 10 years, I guarantee you I won't be able to get a refrigerator unless it's used without Wi-Fi. Okay? Thank you very much. I don't want Wi-Fi. Okay. Do you know you can now buy an electric toothbrush with Bluetooth connectivity? You can connect your electric toothbrush to the internet. Okay. Why do I want to do that?
Right.
So there are these questions about, does what you're buying with the new functionality make sense?
Yes. And
people aren't willing to ask that question. What? If you unpack what I just said, it sounds like I'm anti-innovation. Well, guess what? In some cases, I am anti-innovation. I'm anti-innovation that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't buy you a significantly improved product that actually has benefits that outweigh the costs.
Right.
And this happens in the military too. They want the system to do all sorts of things, the singing and dancing, systems that are complicated and that give you lots of functionality and that everybody really wants to use and so on. It's going to be a lot more complicated. It's going to be less secure.
Right.
And everything that we've heard about nuclear command and control and these new systems that are coming online, it says we want more functionality, and nobody is taking a look at the downside risk of getting that. That's my problem.
Right. So Herb, I understand when a nation wants to use cyber warfare, to call it, for lack of a better term, but cyber warfare, if they want to use cyber ability to muck in our elections, to hack machines and screw up vote counts. They're not choosing who the next president will be necessarily. They just want to confuse our democratic process and just sow the seeds of confusion and chaos in this country. Colonial Pipeline, another good example of this, I think. You shut down that pipeline. I think it was for 5 days it was shut down, if I'm not mistaken, Herb. You're not shutting down the American economy, but you sure as heck are disrupting it. And again, just causing a lot of confusion and chaos, if you will. But explain to me the goal of going after nuclear weapons. The obvious one is that you want to shut down our nuclear capabilities so you can launch nuclear weapons against us. We can't reply in kind, or am I missing some sort of James Bond aspect here where you could actually hack into a nuclear weapon and launch it and send it on your direction? I'm trying to get at what is the end game of actually trying to go after our nuclear system.
There are two. Let me distinguish between two kinds of cyber risk here. One kind of cyber risk that you face is from the Russians, for example.
Right.
And they have an interest in doing a cyber attack on our nuclear weapons to prevent us from using ours.
Yes.
You can see why that would be in the Russian interest. Right. No Russian is going to try to trick us into launching nuclear weapons because they're going to be aimed at the Russians. Okay? Right. And they don't want to do that. So a terrorist group might want to do that, but the Russians don't want us to do that. Okay? Their goal is to attack us in a way that shuts it down. So that's the usual threat model. That's mostly what people worry about when they say, I have a threat to my nuclear weapons, there's cyber risk and so on. Russians might get in, they shut them down. Okay. And we can see why that's bad. Okay, because there are weapon systems that we rely on to deter the Russians and so on. If we don't have that, the Russians can do stuff and we can't respond. Okay, so that's one part. There's another part of it, which is less often talked about, which is that cyber comes with inherent ambiguities. And what that might mean is that if if we do something to the Russians or the Russians do something to us, they mean one thing, and we misinterpret what they mean, we could very easily get into some sort of scenario that involves escalation to nuclear war. Here's the example that I mean. Let's pretend, I'm going to just so we understand things. I construct an example where the U.S. is going after cyber stuff on the other side. Let's pretend that the Russians have announced exercise, a nuclear weapons exercise.
Right.
A nuclear weapons exercise, by definition, looks a lot like preparations for a nuclear war.
Right.
That they're going to attack. So we want to know, is this really an exercise, like I say, or is this going to be a clandestine operation to launch a sneak attack?
Right.
So what do? We go into we try to penetrate their nuclear command and control system and to look around because we want to see what they're really saying. We want to know what they're really up to. Right. So we go into it and we look around and, so we're doing it for, entirely understandable reasons, right? Right. We're telling, we want to make sure that we don't overreact, and so on. Let's say the Russians look at this and they're watching us do this. They see us now in their nuclear command and control system. Do you think they're going to be thinking of us as benign? No. Right. They're going to worry that we are now in their systems and we're going to do something really bad to them. So we know we're not going to do anything bad to them. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. But to expect them to believe that we don't, to believe us, that we're not trying to do anything bad, that's beyond the realm of possibility, right? So they're going to think that, we're in there for dastardly reasons. And maybe we're preparing to launch an attack. Right. So now this nuclear exercise turns into something that's a lot more real for them. And you can see how that might start to escalate.
This would have been a component missing during the Cuban Missile Crisis, correct?
Right. That's the sort of that's the sort of thing that you could worry about. But the reason that this is a cyber issue is that an intrusion into your system could be espionage or could be an attack, and you have no way of knowing the difference. I know the difference because I'm the one doing it, but you don't. You're the victim, and you have no way of knowing.
Right. I'm kind of reminded that I think it's the 1983 movie War Games. I don't know if you've seen it or not, with Matthew Broderick.
Right.
Right, where he is a kid who actually hacks into NORAD, and before you know it, we're looking at missiles being launched because there's a virus put in the system or something like that, but just a way to trigger the nuclear attack. But it does get back to almost 40 years ago, the idea that computers could inadvertently be used to launch a strike.
That is the usual scenario that people worry about when you talk about a layperson and so on. I'm actually not particularly worried about that. That's what, if for that to happen, you have to compromise the entire launch sequence and so on. That's why we have people in it.
Yes.
It's not as though there's a button on the president's desk, you press it and the missiles go off. There are people involved in that system all the way down the line. And they have to, validate it and authenticate it. And so there are people who are exercising judgments about that. So I'm not worried about. That's the least of my worries. A terrorist can be doing that, but the terrorists are much less likely than the Russians to know about how our nuclear command and control system works. Okay, so I'm less worried about that.
Okay, so you're an academic and you're concerned about this. Are people high up in government concerned? Are lawmakers concerned about this? Do you have their attention? Because I see a lot of distractions out there. I see a struggling economy. I see COVID. I see we're now having big arguments about our culture in schools and so forth. So how do you get this on lawmakers' radar screen?
With podcasts like this. I don't have a good answer to that. Do I?
Well, I think there is an answer actually, Herb, in that. And let's talk about this for a minute. We have only a few minutes left on this. In terms of the structure of the government and how cybersecurity fits into the U.S. government right now, which agency or agencies house it, and how much muscle do those agencies really have?
Well, that is an interesting question. One of the organizations with the most knowledge, like the National Security Agency, most knowledge about cyber stuff, and so on, is an intelligence agency of the U.S. government.
Right.
So people in the private sector are not particularly inclined to trust an intelligence agency with cyber. because they worry about invasion of privacy and all this other stuff. Then there are other players who have the mission to work with the private sector and so on, but they're not regarded as particularly competent.
Right.
Organizations like the Department of Homeland Security and so on. Now, I think in both cases it's a bad rap. I think that DHS actually is pretty competent about many things cyber related. And NSA, the people that I know there are particularly concerned. They go out of their way to be concerned about privacy and civil liberties and so on. And I have a lot. I personally have non-trivial faith that they'll execute their responsibilities properly. But by and large, the American public does not share these perceptions of mine. And there's a lot of suspicion about the intelligence agencies, and there's a lot of doubts about the competence of DHS. And in that environment, you don't trust somebody, and the other people you don't think are competent. What would you expect to happen? The answer is very little.
Right. So a rather naive question: is there any possibility of international cooperation on cybersecurity, or is this just every country doing what they need to do to protect themselves?
That's the one question that I do address in the book. Is this question of is there a place where we could cooperate,
right?
And or do we just do our own thing to secure? I think there is, and my desire there is to consider the following: if you are, perish the thought, ever in a war, in a nuclear war, the thing you really, really, really want to be able to do is to have our president stay in touch with their president.
Right.
Right. How do you turn a war off once it's started? And that means our leaders have to be able to negotiate with each other. They have to be able to talk to each other.
Right.
And think about doing that in a nuclear environment. That's really a tough problem. Because you have nuclear weapons going off here and there. They disrupt communications. You have your fiber optic cables being cut on both sides. You have your satellites being attacked. This is a serious move. How are you going to stay in touch with the other guy?
Well, Herbert also had not just a nuclear environment, but a Twitter environment, because at the same time in which you're trying to negotiate with the country and try to bring something peaceful, who knows what's on Twitter being spread in terms of crazy rumors.
That's also true. That's a different point.
Right.
You're absolutely right about that. But just this question of how you stay in touch with the other guy,
right?
That's really hard to do. And I mean, imagine that if you're, maybe the presidents are flying around so that you can't target them. But do you want, if you were a president, would you want to be sending out broadcasting on a radio when you're up in the air? When the other guy might use that to target you. That's that's pretty dicey. And so there are all kinds of interesting problems in this that nobody has yet solved, and I don't see very much attention being paid to it. So I actually think that this question of how you stay in touch in the middle of a war is a very important question, and you can't just assume that it's all going to happen at the State Department or something like that.
Final question for you, Herb. Let's make it a quick one since we have only a couple minutes left. It seems to me a lot of what the Biden administration is doing is just kind of going along with what the Trump administration did. There's a lot of continuity on cyber for now, at least. But we'll soon be at the 1-year mark of this administration. Do you expect a departure at some point, some policy shift from what the Trump administration did?
Only on the margins. Not very, not on a large scale. No, I don't. Because the problem is that there are entrenched interests, and they don't particularly care whether it's R or D in the White House. Private sector does not want to spend more money on cybersecurity than it has to. For example, that's true regardless of who's in office.
Okay.
Maybe the Democrats are more responsive to an idea that you have to impose regulation. And maybe you can say that Republicans are a little bit more allergic to regulation. On the other hand, Republicans have supported legislation to make cars safer. So who knows? I mean, there are some minor differences, but in the large scheme of things, I don't see major things changing.
Okay, so final question. I do promise this is the final question. A year from now, 2 years from now, will we be safer in terms of nuclear weapons? Will they be cyber safer?
I hope so. I'm going to work as hard as I can to do that. That's part of why I wrote the book.
Okay, Herb, that's a good place to end it off. Hey, I enjoyed the conversation. Let's do a podcast soon. Keep on talking about this. Herb, thanks for joining us today. And more importantly, thanks for all you do for the Hoover Institution. It's much appreciated, my friend.
Thank you. I enjoy being here and I hope to see you again. Thank you.
The title of the book again, Cyber Threats and Nuclear Weapons. It is available online, meaning, yes, you can purchase it at Amazon. I hope you get it before Christmas if you're going to gift it, but sounds like a good Christmas gift to me. I think Herb would agree too. If you want to learn more about Herb Lin, follow Herb Lin. Yes, he is on Twitter, brave man that he is. His Twitter handle is @HerbLin Cyber. Let me spell it out for you. That is HerbLinCyber @HerbLin Cyber. You can also follow Herb through the Hoover Institution and what we call the Daily Report. You go to hoover.org, click on the Publications tab, goes where it says Daily Report, click on that, hit subscribe. That means that every time Herb writes something, he's going to show up in the Daily Report, so you can follow him there. You can also keep up with him on his own little section of the Hoover website as well. For the Hoover Institution, I'm Bill Whalen. Thanks again for watching Book Club. We'll be back soon with a new author and a new topic. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching.